The present regatta headquarters were built in 1986. Previously, staff had worked from various premises, but within easy reach of the river.
My first day at the regatta, when I was shown into my office, which was the corner of a large room, I sat down on an ordinary wooden chair and the huge typewriter up here. And I then got a whole load of telephone directories and sat on those. But in those days you didn't expect an awful lot. And there I was typing away like this. But when somebody said, "No, I'd like 5 carbon copies, please." Well, in these days it's so easy with a photocopier. But if you made a mistake, you had to rub out 5 copies or start again. So life was much more difficult generally. And as for communications at the regatta, I think people just shouted at one another. They didn't have walkie-talkies and things. We moved to Leander Club, where we had one large room, and we worked there for some years, but it got absolutely hopeless because there wasn't enough room. The regatta owned a large shed, you may remember, behind the Carpenter's Arms. And the Carpenter's Arms was then boarded up with corrugated iron and looked awful. I said to Richard Goddard, the then secretary, "Enough's enough, we must go for that building." And so Peter Coney, who was the chairman, said, "We'll put in an offer." And it was accepted, and then came the present headquarters.
I said they knocked in a perfectly good pub to build that place. It was marvellous during the regatta week. All the boatmen, all the river people used to get in there. They used to have a challenge cup for the boatmen of the regatta. It was a white enamelled po with those bits on it, and the boatmen used to play darts or whatever it was for that every Tuesday before the regatta.
Thousands of visitors pour into town for Regatta Week, many who've been before probably recalling sunny days spent on the riverside. However, there are those who can remember some regatta weeks when adverse weather conditions created problems.
We used to go down with Father and watch the fair coming in through Remenham Lane, because the fields down by the regatta, of course, were very marshy in those days. In fact, down by Remenham Farm, it was all marshland. They'd have one of those steam traction engines with a hawser, and they would tow them through the gate there, all the mud and things. It was such a shame because you'd see these lovely caravans and things of the fairground up to their ankles in mud, and it was quite a hard work for them to get it all in.
One year we had terrific rain and thunderstorms, and the area became a quagmire. So the fair people decided to lay down bales and bales of straw all around their rides and side stalls, and one can imagine how it got trod in, and the smell was horrendous. But then just after that year, the river was dredged and they built that whole area up, including the Martha Road Meadows side, was all built up by several feet with ballast on the river.
Over the years, I used to dredge regularly. I remember going fishing there during the war. In front of Phyllis Court, you could stand in the middle of the river. So they had to dredge it because it had to be 9 foot deep. Look. I know as a kid, there used to be you go ice skate. Well, I never couldn't afford ice skate, but people with ice skates would go ice skating in general enclosure when that froze, because it used to flood there.
The mud, you know, when the cows come home to be milked and they go through a gateway there, well, it was just like that. It was chocolate blancmange everywhere. And there was not a blade of grass to be seen. And after the regatta, we found 76 shoes buried in the mud, so which were never reclaimed, but they just disappeared in the chocolate blancmange. It was awful, but it was so awful that it became amusing. That was the only way to treat it. And any girl wearing a white coat came out looking like a Dalmatian.
Before travelling abroad was taken for granted, the arrival of crews from many faraway countries filled Henley's residents with awe and excitement. Crews would be accommodated amongst the locals in pubs, hotels and private houses, hanging their national and college flags from the windows.
And they'd dance up the road with you, would they, do? And all the girls was after crew boys. So if you picked up a crew boy, you were really somebody, you know. And there were some really smashing ones, weren't
Oh, yeah. And some of them knew it as well, though, didn't they? Even
yeah. Oh, yeah.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah.
Haven't got 2 items for a penny, though.
Our fathers used to say to us, now you get into trouble, you'll go to the workhouse and that's where you'll stay until I choose to fetch you out. The crew boys started getting a little bit fresh. We used to run like that.
I found that we got on very well with them and with the general public as well. I'm talking from the time I started, like 1954, up until the late 50s, early 60s. I'd done my point duty in the cross centre and I was standing on the pavement and suddenly my head felt a lot cooler than it should have done. And I suddenly realised my helmet wasn't where it should be. And I turned round and saw this great gangling crew boy belting off down Duke Street with my helmet in his hand. So I gave chase. And we got down to the crossroads and into Reading Road. And coming up in the opposite direction was a thin lad dressed completely in black leather from head to foot with his girlfriend. And suddenly he detached himself from his girlfriend and he made a wonderful rugger tackle at this tall guy and brought him down. What breath I got left. I said, "You're under arrest for stealing my helmet." And he said, "Gee, man, I never thought you'd run as fast as that." Across the other side of the road, I saw a group of guys who I realised were the rest of the crew. We got up to the police station and the whole lot came in with us quietly. They were well behaved. The duty sergeant came out and of course I had to explain to him what had happened. And then I realised the sergeant was in a turmoil because it wouldn't have been an offence where he could have put the chap in the cells and kept him there until court. Well, for one thing, I think this chap was in a race that afternoon and so his crew would need him. And so the sergeant sort of winked at me and said, "Well, Pete," he said, "now you've got your helmet back, do you want to pursue this any further?" So I said, "No, I'm very happy, I've got it, thanks. It saved me an awful lot of paperwork." I said, "As far as I'm concerned, it's over and done with." So he said to this crew boy, he said, "Look," he said, don't you ever do anything like this again," he said, "or you will go into the cells." And he said, "Gee whiz, that's very good of you, man." And we shook hands and he went off. I was pleased to see him go.
I think they felt quite an affiliation with us over the years, because even if it was only 3 to 4 years, it was quite a big time in a young man's life. They get to know people, and they like to get to know. They like to feel they knew people, and weren't just saying, "Oh, come down with my food," sort of thing. They weren't that sort. They were very good. They were very polite. If a bit over the top sometimes, they were still basically very polite young men, and they appreciated what they got.
The Russians, going back some time, they were entertained at Leander, and I do remember being there one evening, and some very frightening gentlemen appeared in grey suits and ties and things, and I just beckoned. And that was obviously the KGB, who thought the crews were having too good a time, and they all got up and left. So one saw quite an interesting side of it.
You've got to remember that we used to have the Russians coming over, and you know, when they were CCP, USSR, and you had all those, and you had the Australians, and you had the French, the Italians. You know, for us to like meet crews like for Japan, even like, you know, meet people, because all you went to was, let's face it, in those days was Worthing, Ilfracombe, wasn't it? You know, I mean, you never went abroad for your holidays. That basically started me off on collecting a rowing kit. which I still do today, believe it or not.
We used to have the week off from school for regatta. As children, brother and I, of course, living in New Street, we would go to the bottom of New Street, and where you looked straight down the course, we would watch every race. And certainly if there was local involvement, like the first regatta after war in 1946, when the Henley crew reached the quarterfinals of the Thames Cup, I should think half of Henley were at the bottom of New Street. Offices were empty and shops were empty, and that because all the staff were down at the bottom, because the crew were all local, the people that worked in the shops and worked for the local builders and things, and they probably had a couple of hours off to row in the race and then back to work again. And so one felt far more involved in those days with the regatta. I would imagine that is the race I remember most of all, was when the Henley crew were through to the quarterfinals of the Thames Cup, because it seemed as if all Henley were involved.
The other thing I think really is that the famous story of the British pair, Cambridge, Oxford Cambridge Blues, who were rowing and were very keen on sawing bits off their boat. And it's quite absolutely true that every day they were training, they were reducing the weight of their wooden constructed boat by taking off little struts they didn't think were actually essential for the race. They actually went a stage too far in the final, and there was a resounding crack somewhere around Fawley, and they did actually sink.